I'm Stefan Baumann, and welcome once again to the Baumann Effect, number 14. In this particular episode, we talk about artist burnout, artist block. We talk about how to create art through nuance and how to become an original oil painter. How do we do original painting from nothing? How do we draw our own personal experiences so that we can share it with the rest of the world? This particular episode will show you how to break through boundaries and find new directions. It's really quite powerful. So stay tuned and watch this, and I look forward to giving you some more information at the other end of this demo. We're going to be doing today nuance painting. So one of my students called me up and we were talking, and I said, "What's wrong?" She says, "Oh, I'm just not feeling it anymore." And I go, "Why?" And she goes, "Oh, I have a disconnect. It's like sometimes when you're doing pictures from calendars and pretty pictures, and you just feel like this machine that's just producing work, and you go, where am I? Who am I? What am I? Am I just a fancy photographer that can put things into oil? And why do this if I can get a computer to do it so much better? Nowadays you can get a photograph, take a photograph, have it transferred to canvas, and it looks just like a painting. And it's like, well, why am I doing this? One of the reasons why art went from the Impressionist into modern art is that the invention of the camera came in, and basically artists were like somewhat replaced. So the whole idea that what we are doing constantly is just recreating photos can be really quite dull. And you ask yourself, who am I in this world of being an artist? So we were talking about it, and I said, and this happens to several of my students because it's called an artist block. And some of you sit and watch these videos all day long because you're all sitting in a block and you go, I don't know what to paint, just lost, who am I, where am I? And the thing is, I have discovered a way to kind of unblock students a little bit and find out really, what kind of makes us interesting. Why are we involved with art in the first place? And first thing you have to get that art is a self-expression. It's a communication to people without words. And part of that is like, it's not about copying a pretty picture from Half Dome or Yosemite or Grand Canyon or somewhere. It really isn't. It's about kind of who you are as an artist. And we use objects such as humans and dogs and still lives to try to find a place where we can express ourselves. But the reality is that it is a self-expression place, and a lot of students go into doing modern art thinking that they're going to find whatever that is that they're looking for, and in a way nuance painting kind of does that. Nuance painting is very similar to when you are laying on the beach and you're looking up at the clouds, and all of a sudden you stare at a cloud and you go, oh my god, that looks like a horse going across the sky. And you sit and watch, you go, Martha, look over there, look at that horse. Wow. And she'll look at you, go, oh my god, look at the chariot. And you go, oh yeah, I see the chariot. And then you look at it a little further and go, wow, that chariot's turning into a big teddy bear. And your mind just kind of wants to make sense of things. Now the idea of what abstract art is that abstract art is taking something and abstract it to the point where the brain can't really make sense of it. That's truly abstract. That's kind of where Jackson Pollock was going with his art, is that true abstract is like this, not just an interpretation of something loosely, with circles and squares. It actually is trying to express something that is unexpressible. Ideally, that's what abstract art should do, and kind of have you see the world differently. What nuance painting is trying to connect your subconscious with your conscious, but trying to be more subconscious. And the way that we do that is that we start pushing paint on the canvas. And I usually use a combination of asphaltum and ultramarine blue. And I keep pushing it around and pushing it around until something happens. And at this point, some of the students will actually like start running with that, whatever that is. But sometimes it's like, well, that was a nice share, let's go further. So we're going to try to do a little bit of that. Nuance painting. First thing, I'm using liquid. And normally I would do this on a board. This is actually a masterpiece canvas. And I just snagged it because actually I've got this really awesome frame at home. And so I thought, oh, this would be fun to do this and see if I come up with something. So a couple of weeks ago I did a painting where we did some glazing on a painting that I did was called Fairy Falls, which was a sketch that I did on location. And so what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be thinking about Fairy Falls. Now remember, painting is a human thing. It's not a mechanical thing. That's why working with cameras and stuff, it doesn't represent the human spirit, the feeling that you get when you go outdoors to paint. And what we want to do is recreate what it feels like for us to be outdoors. And so when I travel out to the parks and stuff, oftentimes it's best just to be quiet. I have students and professional artists that I know will actually drive through a national park with their camera stuck out of the window, and they're taking pictures of the park while they're driving through. That's not what painting is. Painting is absorbing a national park or absorbing a place or even absorbing a baby in a crib and connecting with that emotionally. And so what I do with nuance painting, oftentimes I don't have anything in my mind, which is, if you talk to a lot of people, they might agree with you. It's like, no, he's always off sniffing turpentine or something. But anyway, so, all right. So I'm going to take a mixture of asphaltum. I coated my canvas first with a liquid only because I want to get this thing moving. I want to make sure that it's just like with watercolors. You want to dip your paper or spray your paper so that the paint just doesn't grab on. And so we wanted this to kind of move around a bit. And take a paper towel. And I have some students that fall in love with this process so much that this is all they do all week. Oh, I did nuance paintings. Well, let me see. Well, I did like 12 of them, but then they evolved into something else, and I just played with it. So we kind of do that. And you start kind of making marks and wiping the surface down. And this is why having a board or oil primed canvases are really good, because you can kind of play with it. Now, a lot of people had asked me, they said, you know, do you stain your canvases before you start painting? And if you watch my TV show, you'll notice I do that because of cameras don't like having white surfaces, or at least the older ones didn't. They couldn't focus in on it. They go zip, 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 zip. I do stain my canvases. This is the way I would start something. And I just kind of think about some place like Fairy Falls, and then in my mind I just wander through it. And I go, what would be an ideal, feeling of falls? And I just let a lot of medium up in here, pushing it around, paper towels. Like I said, this is something that you kind of do late at night when everybody goes to bed, and you kind of do some crazy shapes. Now, if you are an artist that wants to get really a lot of energy in your paintings, a lot of students come to me and they go, God, Stefan, I want to know how to do that energetic stuff that you see these artists do. A lot of this stuff is now. Yeah. We're so hesitant in putting stuff in that, this energy here, these first brushstrokes can dictate what the rest of the painting does. And if you know anything about looking at some of those paintings, you would see that oftentimes there's this energy. And I go between ultramarine blue and asphaltum because I like having the variety. You could go just with brown, and if you're staining your canvas and you're going with just brown, that's kind of boring too. And I just keep on getting it wet, moving it around, kind of guessing, okay, so Fairy Falls kind of feels a little.
How do you decide when and when not to stain your canvas?
When and when not to stain the canvas. I never want my students to show up with stained canvases. I like staining the canvas as I go. I like working wet on wet. If this were not a demonstration, I'd even add a drop of clove oil into this to keep this whole process kind of wet and simple. This will dry fairly quickly. And compositionally, you want to kind of keep in mind that the center focal point is in the middle third somewhere. But it's not a science, it's just a nuance of this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just start wiping off where I think I want a waterfall. But since I'm not working really from a photograph or anything like that, I kind of let the painting, I look at it and see, do I see, like originally I thought I'd have a bigger waterfall, but then all of a sudden some of these brush strokes here kind of felt like, there'd be an interesting tree. Sometimes when I work on something like this, all of a sudden I'll see a ghost somewhere of a, I'll do something like this and I'll go, oh my God, that looks like a cool place to stick a bear. And I'll make a footnote and say, that's my bear there. Yeah, that's a rhyme, there's a bear there. There's a bear, where? Over there. So here's a bear. And so I'll put a footnote in, if I all of a sudden feel it. But I don't want to marry myself to anything. I've had artists that they will have this feeling of light just spilling out, and it basically is a nuance of lights and shadows. We are trying to get the feeling of light and shadow without really sticking with form. And we kind of go ahead and just have enough confidence that whatever you're doing, you're going to figure your way out. And this is the ultimate. When I tell you, really great art is always created in that transition from knowledge and no knowledge from naivety, and that transition right in the middle, that important thing, is when you feel like you're saying to yourself, oh shit. That's where art is created. So you're putting stuff on. It's just like when I put this on, I said to myself, oh shit, what am I going to do with it? But the thing is, don't fret over it, just push it around. Grab a hold of a brush and just go, it's dark in that. You see how I started kind of with the light colors first, and I'm slowly getting darker? I have not a clue of what I'm planning on doing. I can kind of see, at this point, before I even got to this, there was unlimited possibilities to this painting. And that's one thing that I have noticed, is that when we are painting on a white canvas, the possibilities are endless. It can be anything from a flower to a portrait to wild animals. It's completely up to the artist. But as we start focusing in, the possibilities start to get narrower and narrower. And one thing you kind of have to get, that this is really messy. I don't know if you got dirty paper towels in your hand, you're stroking it off. Now just remember, I'm a professional, so don't try this at home by yourself. Always have adult supervision. No, just kidding. What is he doing? One of the things that I had told one of my students earlier, who had asked me about, do I want my canvas stained or not? If you notice, I'm kind of doing an abstract here, shape, trying to get the feeling of a waterfall. Not quite sure where that's going to be yet, but I know it's going to be spectacular. I may have a bear in there, I may not. That might turn into a moose, but up at Fairy Falls, up in Mount Shasta, there are no mooses up there. There are elk. But if you stain this canvas first, you have no other options. Everything's brown. And you don't have the option to wipe off. And part of getting the concept, which is actually what we're doing right now, remember, concept you have to do before you start having a painting, is that you want to start laying in some color. Now, I'm going to start putting in some blue up there, actually to give us a feeling that there's some blue sky up there. If I had a stained canvas, I wouldn't be able to do that in the concept stage. I'm even looking at the camera right now, and there's kind of a neat cast shadow that's happening with the waterfall. So I'm thinking, okay, well, I'll play that up. We'll have the waterfall kind of grand coming over and having it cast a shadow against the wall. And remember, everything that I do is always for a lighting effect, and that's easy to kind of do when you're wiping things off. And if you notice, I'm actually painting with a paper towel. Now, you know, our relationship with paper towels is a little less intimate than with brushes. So sometimes when we pick up a brush, we have this attachment to that it's something that, you know, is like a major thing. People go, oh, tell me, what is the brush that you use? Because I should be able to paint if I have that brush. But the reality is that, you know, I could give you this brush here, and if you want it, just, you know, let me know. But it's not going to do anything special for you. This one actually, before I put it in my box today, I used it in my kitchen to clean tile. So, you know, it just doesn't have any magic to it. But when we start painting with paper towels, we kind of have a little different feeling for it, and we can kind of feel like we can just push and pull. Please look at how quickly I can start drawing that concept in when I'm not dealing with that whole brush thing. And this kind of sometimes is the way I would start a painting outdoors. Not trying to mirror what it is, but try to capture the feeling of what it feels like. Things that I know, like if I'm going to put a bear here, I should backlight it so that the water kind of goes off into here. Yeah, as things come more forward, they should get darker. And sometimes when you lay it dark in, like this, you start wiping it off, and really the pleasures of color come through, because we're not working with any white. This is pure color, and nothing's actually more beautiful than, this is where watercolors have oil painters beat. But if you actually, shadows should be dark and transparent, and sometimes if you just wipe off an area like that, you can get the most beautiful pure color. That's the attraction of watercolors, is that you can't get those kind of colors once you start adding white in. It kind of kills it some. But at this stage you can do that. If you look at early paintings by Whistler and Moran and those artists back in the day, they actually would paint all of their shadows like this, very transparent. You actually see the canvas. If you ever go to the Metropolitan Museum, go take a look at those masters, Bierstadt, Moran, Whistler, Enos, and their darks are really transparent. You can see through them, and they're luminous, because you can't get that color. And then what they do is they do opaque highlights on top of it, and you get like a three-dimensional ray.
So where do you see in the line of sight on this, as far as?
You mean like the horizon?
Yeah.
Where do I see the horizon? Well, you know, the thing is, we always want the horizon to be in the middle. So the question was, where do I see the line of sight? Which is important if you're actually creating a painting. It's one of my keys. And so you do have to kind of have a reference point. And this is a good time, glad you brought that up. This is a good time to even discuss a little bit about that. So the middle of the canvas is usually what we're looking at. So if I'm looking at you, I'm looking straight at you. So if you just kind of are conscious at how we see things, you look across the street, you look across your living room, that your horizon line is where your eyes are. And we pretty much put everything in the middle. If your husband walks in, you move your eye up, the line of sight goes up if you're sitting down. And so, but we put his face, his eyes predominantly, because that's what we're attracted to, in the middle of the canvas, or the middle of our sight. We don't look at the floor and talk to somebody up there. You know, we always put our line of sight dead center on whatever it is that we look at. But, you know, my mother told me that when she first gave me a camera, she said, don't put the crosshairs in the middle of your picture. You want to go a little higher or lower, or left or to the right. And so you want to have something in the middle. So your horizon line, especially if we're looking straight at the scene, The horizon line would be dead center in the painting. Okay, and since my mom was always right, that's mainly because she was German. You will do it, and you will do it my way, and you will like it. That center, that would be the horizon right there. Dead center in the painting, okay. Now since we don't want to have anything dead center, you want to move the center focal point to the right or to the left. But guess what? In a waterfall like this, we can leave it dead center. You know, it's kind of like, so we're standing on some rocks in the foreground. Now another thing that you want to kind of get is a sense of place. So we need to be standing on something. We can't have this waterfall just fall. And so we need to have the feeling that we're actually standing on a cliff, having a form, you know, that has this. The water could fall beneath us and even away from us, so that we've really got a strong place in the painting. And just, you see, if we make the waterfall go this way, so that's why I have all these keys on a sheet of paper, because you need to kind of think about them even when you're doing these little nuance things. Okay, so we're going to have, and I want to make sure that I always have enough rock to stand on. I always want my viewer to feel like they're planted on something. So all of this in here will be foreground rocks. So that's a sense of place. So my viewer isn't lost looking at this. If I'm going to put a focal point in, let me see if I can wipe it off. Now I have so much liquid on this canvas that it's easy for me to kind of wipe it off. It's kind of like what watercolors do with water. It's so saturated with liquid. And so I would want to kind of make the center focal point now. And if you notice, I'm going to the left of center. In the horizon line area, this is where I want the bottom of the waterfall to be. And again, you go through lots of turpentine, lots of paper towels. If you're working on a primed panel, you can get right back up to white. That's the beautiful thing about working with prime. Oil prime canvases get you back with white. The cheaper the canvas, the less layers that you have gesso on them, the harder it is to kind of wipe off to get back to white. But this would be the center focal point. Remember, I always want to have the center focal point within the middle area. Notice that I'm putting it up against a real dark rock here. And one of my favorite things, if you want to buy me a Valentine's present sometime in the future, one of my favorite things in the whole world are boulders with moss on them. It's my favorite thing in the whole world. So if you want to bring me a big boulder with moss on it, you're my gal. Anyway, I'm easy to shop for. It's just hard to deliver. Okay, so water always seeks its lowest form. So I'm going to try to make the waterfall, whatever's going to hold the waterfall back. And we want to kind of have a spot where the water falls. Now, this is where we said, oh, that's a good question, where the horizon line is. One thing that you kind of want to get, and why it's so important to know where the horizon line is, and this is where a lot of beginner students mess up because they're not thinking while they're painting. You know, when we're standing here looking, everything that we look at, including this bear at this point, because he's sitting below the horizon line, we're going to be looking down on. So if I were to do a bear here, I'd actually like have the back of the bear showing, and his belly would be gone. And I see this a lot of times when people put animals into a picture, they're not realizing where the horizon line is. And so they'll draw this bear and you'll see this wonderful chest and the under part of the bear, the ears, you know, back behind the head, and it looks out of place. That's because when the bear is down below the horizon, we're actually looking at the back and the ears up in front and the top of the head, and the belly, you know, is kind of hidden from us. So that would be that. The rocks that we're standing on here, we're looking, if our horizon line's up here, this is where our eye level line is, right here. We'd be looking down on these rocks and we'd be looking at the top of the rocks. So all the rocks in the foreground we'd be looking on top of. The same thing here. So these rocks in here, you can wipe off the tops to give you a footnote to remind you, hey, we're looking down on these rocks. And a lot of people don't realize that when they're making stuff up. And all of a sudden they just do side profiles of rocks when we should be looking down. The rocks that are in the middle we're looking at, and these rocks that are up here, we don't see the tops anymore. We can't, because they're sitting like this up here. You know, if they're down here, we can see the tops. When they're up here, the tops are actually up above that. We're actually looking underneath the rock. And a lot of times, you actually will paint more of what's happening at the bottom of the rock area. So, and we start picking at the rocks. Same thing with the trees. We're looking up at this forest up here. So we would have the reference of these trees as if we're looking up at them. And when we start painting in the branches, we're going to make them look like we're looking up at them as opposed to at them, where we'd look more like a Christmas tree lot. And I think, you know, I would probably end up putting somewhere in here, I'd probably have a couple of trees in here, because I just love that as far as giving scale and size. And here again too, these branches, because we're close to the horizon line, would actually be the side profile of them. But as we look further up at these trees, we're going to be looking underneath the branches and getting a different view. And so here we might actually see the branches holding up the limbs and seeing the limbs on top of the branches, where down here the branches might be even covering the limbs because we're looking at them. So having a horizon line is really crucial. When you're painting stuff like Yellowstone Canyon, you got to keep in mind that all the rocks throughout that have perspective, and that kind of helps with the horizon line and with the sense of place. But perspective is one of those things that's key on everything. The highlights, those are the things that make things interesting. So like, okay, so the center focal point here would be the light. We're going to put a light across the waterfall here, so I put a footnote in of the cast shadow. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and take some sky color, and we're just going to go ahead and paint this. Now remember, this up to this point has been nothing but layers of transparent paint with no white. It's actually more of a stain, wipe off, lots of liquid. You should be smelling what I'm smelling up here. Woo. And so what I'm doing here is I'm starting to put in the sky. Here I'm actually starting to put paint. Now remember, paint is applied in the same consistency as you would put soft butter on a bagel when you're not on a diet. So you want soft, not melted butter, but soft butter, that wonderful creaminess. And you want to put it on as if you're not on a diet. So you want lots of paint on there. And as we get down towards the horizon gets cooler and lighter. As we get further up into the horizon, the sky gets warmer. Going to go in with more ultramarine blue and cobalt blue towards the top. This is just cobalt blue here. The transitions of color are so important. And to use the color, you know, in its glory, in using cerulean blues and ultramarine blues and cobalt blues, it's just so much more exciting than just painting with putting white into things. You know, I am a big fan of limited palettes, but I'm even a bigger fan of temperature. So if you're going to do something like that, you want incredible color, you want incredible transitions, and temperature is really the key to painting. I can't not stress that, and I cannot believe the conversation of temperature is almost silent when you look it up on YouTube. So if you want more information on all that stuff, you can go to my Patreon station, where I produce more and more videos on all of these topics that we use. So I'm using cool color. Now the light's coming from the right hand side, so I want to get it a little bit brighter over there. So anyway, so I'm going to put the effect of light in. Again, if I was going to work on this, one of the things I always want to start doing is establishing the center focal point. And I would put that in here, and I would put that in early. And the central focal point here would be the effect of light on, I don't know yet if it's going to be all mist, depending on how I want to mystify all that. In order for me to see that, I have to kind of start putting in some darker colors around it. I'm going to go towards gray by adding a little bit of my asphaltum into my blue. I'm going to be darkening around all of this other water has to go towards a darker tone so that that light shows up. And I don't know if you can actually see that in the picture. One thing with waterfalls is that I kind of work from the waterfall out. I'll actually like lay in the waterfall the way that I want it. And you remember, if light's coming in at a 45-degree angle, it's going to get light on anything that's on a perpendicular angle. So right here, the mist is going to be growing. There's a platform for the light to hit, and this will actually make sense there. But on the vertical, there's nothing on the vertical to really capture light. So your vertical planes are going to be a half a shade or a shade darker. And then if we have the cast shadow that we talked about that's going to go in there, that too will actually be even darker than that half shadow color, so we can get that effect of light. The only place we would get more light again, and this is why when you're painting with one brush and you're doing a demo like this, it's always best to have that really harsh turpentine so that you can keep that brush clean, because you need it to dip into things. But you can see that this area here, because of the angle of the light coming in at a 45-degree angle, that angle right here would have more light than the vertical. The vertical would be darker. And let's go ahead and lighten this up. This here would be a little bit of a checkering. I'm going to lighten up the waterfall just a tad in here. So what I did here is that I want this to be darker, that cast shadow darker in there, so I did some light and it did checkering. If you're not sure what checkering is, go check my YouTube videos under the best advice you'll have for painting or your money back. Don't contact me for any money back, because if you're on YouTube, you haven't paid anything anyway. So, but it's the best advice, how to improve your painting or your money back. And that's my conversation on checkering. Highly recommend to go check that out. So I'm actually making the cast shadow darker, the waterfall lighter. And you have to ask yourself, where is this all coming from? And it's all in my head. It's all my experiences. It's me taking a walk, looking at mossy rocks, which I love so much. That's going to be so much in the foreground. Waterfalls and feeling the waterfalls and not sticking to a plan, and just let the painting grow as you want to. That's part of the nuance painting. Just discover yourself, and if all of a sudden you see a bear, put a bear in. If you see an elk, put an elk in. If you see two people jumping off the cliff, tell them don't. I don't know, but you want to paint with passion, paint with ideas. Don't try to copy a calendar and render, because that's not what we are, and that's boring. And if you're getting artist block, it's because you're bored. You're bored with painting, you're bored with copying, you're bored with rendering things that have already been rendered some way. You're not a Xerox machine, you're a passionate artist that paints with spontaneity. You don't have to go to abstract, you just have to create the world with a little more passion. But there's so much passion here that I want you to kind of get. Always remember that, if I come to the studio, I want to change the world. That's why I do what I do. So you shouldn't go to the studio unless you're planning on changing the world. And I'm Stefan Baumann. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next week. Well, that was an interesting conversation about breaking through artist block, and it's a real thing. That's why they call it artist block. It's a place where we go that we just feel like we can't break through a barrier and find what's on the other side. So try nuance painting. It's amazing. For more information about what we're doing here at the Baumann Effect, go to www.stefanbaumann.com. And while you're there, go check out my free book, Everything I Know About Painting. And also on my website, you can check out information about my PBS show, The Grand View, America's National Parks Through the Eyes of an Artist. There you can also find information about my Patreon station, or you could go directly to Patreon and sign up for some coaching there. Or if you'd like to get more coaching personally from me, you could just give me a call at 415-606-9074, and we can have a chat about your future as an artist. So until we meet again at another Baumann Effect, always remember, don't go into your studio unless you're going to change the world. And always remember to paint with passion. I'm Stefan Baumann, and you have a grand day.